Welcome to the Made for Agriculture podcast. Today we have a guest host introducing whoever you are.
All right. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Made for Agriculture podcast. I'm Landry Jones, your host for today. Adam and Cameron couldn't make it, but I thought we would have try to get some folks together and talk about livestock and forage as we move into fall and winter and kind of what that looks like for our producers and livestock producers in the state. And so, again, my name's Landry Jones. I'm a conservation grazing specialist here for MFA Incorporated. And why don't we kind of go around the horn here and have everybody introduce themselves. And as I see it on my screen, I've got Lane kind of up. So Lane, go ahead and introduce yourself to the folks of who you are and what you do for MFA.
Sure. Like Landry said, my name's Lane Groce. Been with MFA for about 6 years now, and I'm a livestock specialist, and I cover most of southern Missouri, central Missouri, and a little bit of northeast Missouri. Working with producers and stores, all things related to livestock. So happy to be on here to hopefully give some insight.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate it. All right, Doc.
Well, I'm Tony Martin. I am the staff veterinarian for MFA Incorporated, have been for the last 37 years. That kind of dates myself, but I've served MFA in various capacities, but primarily responsible for providing the information and potential resource person for our dealers and their employees, but more importantly for our customers. I'm not replacing the existence and the usefulness of private veterinary practitioners, but I'm another resource person to provide information and help them work through problems and production situations that we think we can help make things better for them. So been doing that for several years, and I cover the entire MFA system. Wherever we go, I have the potential for being, so I'm available to all the customers and the dealers wherever MFA has a footprint.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Mr. David Moore.
You bet.
Good morning, everybody. David Moore, Range and Pasture Specialist for MFA. My role revolves around pretty much all things forages. If it has to do with feeding cattle, then kind of falls into my basket. I look forward to visiting with you all this morning.
Great. Well, listen, I appreciate everybody joining me today and to our listeners as well. And so yeah, this podcast I kind of wanted to put together. David and I kind of do an internal, if you want to call it training, virtual training that we send out to staff, and we were going to actually kind of do one of those. And then I got to listen to some podcasts while on the road, listen to a lot of podcasts. And there were some topics that came up that I felt like were probably pretty relevant to listeners out there, to the public themselves. One of those being some of the pests, insects, ticks, some things that are in the national news, some that are maybe in the local news. And just that's why, obviously Dr. Martin's here on the episode, so he can provide his input. But just wanted to kind of let people know where we, especially in Missouri and the Midwest, kind of where we're looking or how we're sitting, things to either look forward to or not to, but things to maybe, be on the lookout as cattle producers. Are these things that we're hearing in the news? Are they something that we need to be concerned with? Or something maybe that we're hearing from our local extension office? How severe is it? And so, Doc, I'll kind of let you chime in. You're the expert on this. And honestly, like I said, it started with some things that I was listening to, and they didn't sound like they were too much of an issue we shouldn't necessarily be concerned with. And then I was talking to a grower here in Southwest Missouri, and he had a cattle or an adult cow, I believe, that died, and a vet come out and necropsied it and said it was due to the Asian longhorn tick. And so just wanted to kind of get you in here. Just kind of tell us about, maybe start off with this Asian longhorn tick. What do we need to, maybe where it started from? How did it get here? What are some management implications, some things that we can do as cattle producers to mitigate this? Is it something we need to be concerned with? I guess just kind of get into it.
You betcha. I'm glad to try and cover a little of it, at least make some points here, because this has been, depending on where you are, and especially if you have had plenty of moisture, this has been a heck of an external parasite year so far. And you throw the Asian longhorn tick as being a fairly new arrival, hit the it creates a lot of concern, almost the sky is falling type of deal, because it's unusual and it's gotten a lot of press. But the Asian longhorn tick is it is native to basically to North or to Eastern Asia. It first was identified here in the United States in about 2017, but there's speculation it's been here a lot longer than that. It was first identified on the East Coast, and it started to really get some press time when it was related to the spread of a disease now called tulariosis, which is very similar to anaplasma, but tulariosis is a parasite, anaplasma is a bacteria. We can get into some of those comparisons we want to, but primarily for the tick, because it has come up in several conversations, just like you mentioned, Landry. I've had that same conversation with other producers and dealer locations. What's special about this tick? Well, really, there's nothing special about the tick. It's just another species of tick we have to deal with. All of us are aware of the Lone Star tick, which is the one that creates the alpha-gal syndrome and the allergy to red meat in humans that get bit by the tick. So you don't manage this tick any differently than you would the other ticks, but it is a concern. It's spread the United States. It's been identified in over 17 states now. Last time I checked with the researcher at the University of Missouri Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, who's been looking into this tick, it's been confirmed within 22 counties in the state of Missouri. So it's here, but not every Asian longhorn tick carries the tularemia, and the Asian longhorn tick is capable of carrying other tick-borne diseases that we're familiar with, like Lyme's disease or Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So tularemia is not the only thing it brings to us. It's yet another vector that can carry other things between animals and people. One thing I might say about it is that's unusual about this tick compared to some of the others. This is what's considered a three-host tick. And basically, each stage of development, whether it be the larva, the nymph, and the adult, each of those particular segments of the development cycle gets on a host, takes a meal, and gets off, and then gets back on another one after it changes its next stage of development. Whereas most ticks we're familiar with, like the deer tick, it'll get on an animal and feed, then drop off, and it develops, and then it gets back on when it's able to do so, and then stays on that same host before it drops off again. It doesn't go through 3 different hosts, so that may make it a little bit harder to get control of in some cases, but our primary concern is how do we control it on cattle. And the best way to approach the control of it is not any different than other ticks. The environmental aspect of it is one of it. If you can fence your cattle away from the densest brush and the heaviest weeds that make it easy for any species of tick to get on livestock, that at least is one way to help minimize their exposure. But if you're the ticks off animals, the appropriate use of pesticides that are labeled for tick control, whether it's using it as a spray. I will say, if you're going to use a spray on an animal for tick control, we typically need to use a good soaking spray, because ticks like the areas under the arms and under the flank and maybe under the tail much more than the upper side of the body. And you're not going to get if you're just spraying over the back, you're not going to hit those ticks and be able to get it done. People will make use of, it takes me back to when I was youngster and they still had dip vats at some of the sale barns that I was around. Dip vats are another way to do it. That's why we do that at the border on cattle coming across. Insecticide ear tags can control ticks in some respect, although I don't depend on that. You can use avermectins, which would be your Ivomec, Dectomax, Epronex, the Cydectin product. If you're going to use those, you're better off using an injectable, though, because again, the extent that ticks carry on the lower body, a pour-on is just not going to cover like it if it does for flies. Horn flies typically on the top or the side of the animal, a pour-on will do a good job, but a spray for ticks is better than a pour-on for ticks. I would mention one other thing that people can keep their eye out for and mention. There is a company called MedGene in South Dakota, which has developed not only a tick vaccine, but a hornfly vaccine. And they have the technology, if they can identify a particular protein in any kind of pest, they can put that one protein in the tick vaccine they developed, at least have some research on. They've identified a particular protein that in a tick's gut, that if you generate an antibody to that protein, which a vaccine will do, and the tick would take a meal, it'll kill the ticks. Again, it's not going to stop the ticks from getting on the animal and taking a meal, but it might help in the long term of maybe minimizing the amount external parasites that are on those animals. So I think it's a neat technology. It's not federally licensed yet. They are using some of the hornfly and tick vaccines on a basically herd by herd basis, working through local veterinarians. But I find that an intriguing technology, and it might be something to keep your eye open for going forward. It may be maybe a piece of control that we haven't had before. A pretty light on doing a better job of minimizing the insult that these pests bring. You got to be aware too that the tick is not the only concern we have in transmitting these diseases that go along with a tick. Remind people about proper needle use and the fact that your ear taggers, if you're drawing a little blood tagging cattle, and or if you're doing a dehorn, hopefully you're doing that through genetics and not the mechanics that I used to use when I was in practice. But any of those things can transfer diseases too. So the ticks don't get all the blame. We have to keep that in mind also. But I think those are the main things I would have to say about the Asian longhorn tick. If anything, I would end by saying it's not of any more concern than the other ticks that we've already had for years. But let's just be aware that there's a new player in the market in terms of being able to transmit disease, and it ought to keep us all on our toes about doing everything we can to minimize the insult.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what, I mean, and I appreciate your input, because that's, when somebody says, for instance, when I was talking with the producer and he said that my cow died from the Asian longhorn tick, well, it's not necessarily the tick, but it's probably the disease that tick was carrying, right? It's not the actual implications, that tick did something different than some of the other parasitic hosts that we deal with. It was just that they happen to be carrying that disease. It also sounds like, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, Doc, but that 3-host system, that's kind of that's a lot different than our other parasites that we deal with. Is that kind of the main issue with this one? I mean, I guess, and we'll get into this because there's another insect we're going to talk about. Is this something that we should be concerned with and evolving to where we really have to worry about it? Or is it just to kind of keep doing what we've always been doing as far as, treating our animals for insects and parasites, and this, this one will really not bother us any differently than any of the other ones that are already currently out there?
Yeah, that's a good question, Landry. And I don't know whether it'll bother us any different, but I have a little more concern knowing it is a 3-host tick, so to speak, because if that offers the opportunity for, more opportunity for, say, zoonotic transfer. If a human becomes one of those 3 sources, it's you're walking through an exposure to it. The one thing I would say, it makes me more aware that maybe there's a greater need or a greater benefit thinking about if you ever get a tick bite or harvest a tick off yourself, you wonder what it is. I think it would be a good practice to put those ticks in a small little prescription jar, whatever you got around, and freeze them. If that way, if there's ever a symptoms that come up later that might be related to that tick bite, you've got the original tick that you could send to diagnostic wise. We are improving the diagnostics that are being applied to the insect vectors, not just ticks, but flies, that I think can become a greater part of our diagnostic efforts when humans and or animals get sick, and we could potentially relate it back to parasite exposure. So I thought I'd mention that one.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I know, working for the conservation department before I took this position, obviously being outdoors a little bit more and in the brush and in the weeds, that was their recommendation, was to try to keep those ticks if you pulled one off of you. And I think a lot of people had a whole separate freezer just devoted to 5-gallon bags of ticks they pulled off. Now I'm trying to decide when that one bit you and when it didn't. Anyways, yeah, no, that is good practice. So let's change gears just a little bit from an insect standpoint. Another insect that's been getting some news here, and more national news probably than anything, is the screwworm. I guess just give us some background on that insect. Again, kind of same scenario. How does it affect cattle producers, maybe in the United States, or how could it potentially? It sounds like it's not in the country yet. What do we need to do as far as management? Just kind of dive into that a little bit, Doc, if you don't mind.
Well, the New World screwworm is what it's called, and that's a particular species name they gave to it. It's like any fly species, it when it lays an egg, egg hatches and turns into a pupa or a maggot, which is the term we usually use. And New World screwworm is no different in that aspect. The difference is that the particular pupa or maggot that it produces will not stop at consuming just dead tissue or injured tissue of an open wound. It burrows down into fresh tissue, and it will basically, you could eat an animal alive if you let it go wild. So that's the biggest concern with it. So what we need to be aware of here in the United States is that if you're dealing with any open wounds on livestock or even people, and you're seeing some fly larvae there, the possibility, that's where you start looking for the New World screwworm, is if it's expanding beyond that area of injured tissue and getting into more and more fresh tissue. New World screwworm, its most recent case in the United States would have been 2016 down in the Florida Keys. So that's it's been here before, and decades before that, it had become a problem. Shoot, back in the 60s, it was a problem down in Texas. It really cost the cattle industry down there a lot of dollars because of loss. Right now, it's nobody has not found it in the United States anywhere, but it's now crept within 350, 370 miles, I guess is what I saw on the last USDA report of the U.S.-Mexican border, whereas they've normally tried to keep it in that small isthmus down there in the southern edge of Central America, that if you can keep it controlled down there, that's several hundred miles away. But the previous report 2 months prior to that had it at 700 miles away, so that particular New World screwworm was able to make it 300 miles closer to the border within 2 months. And it doesn't do it by itself. It's coming on livestock that are typically being shipped from southern Mexico on toward the U.S.-Mexican border, kind of in stages as those cattle grow. So, but it's primarily going to come in on some kind of a livestock or an animal, and that's how it will get across. That's why the Secretary of Agriculture has closed the border and kept it tight until we have things like plan control and knocking it out, dipping cattle border, and or increasing the sterile fly release program, which has really been the prime point of control and the prime method over the last several decades.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like from a control standpoint, at least from a controlling that population, they're using sterile flies to then breed with those flies that we're concerned with, to then reduce that population that way. Is that how they're kind of trying to deal with it large scale?
Yes, that's exactly right. This particular fly species, the females only breed once, and if they breed to a sterile male, then the eggs they lay are not going to hatch and pupate, and that then decreases the population. So that's how they've gone about it. And the facility that was down in Panama, the one they're trying to resurrect in Mexico and build a new one in South Texas, will produce several million of those sterile male flies a week, and then the process releasing them in particular areas where the screwworm is present is then what's used to knock the population down and hopefully keep it under better control.
Okay. And as far as, from a cattle producer standpoint, obviously it's, maybe not in the United States right now or that we're aware of. Is there anything that we need to do management wise any different than what we've been doing, historically or up to this point?
No, we're not really. It's if you find open wounds on livestock, just treat them as you normally would, flush them out good with good fresh water, keep them clean and covered, and whatever you put on them medication, if you're putting something on at all, make sure that the last thing you put over top is some kind of a fly spray that will keep flies from wanting to land there and lay eggs that can potentially turn into the maggots and create the irritation, extra irritation on tissue. And if you're doing that, if the New World screwworm were happen to be there, that helps minimize the chance that even that bug could get attached and create problems.
Okay. All right.
Question for you, Doc. Would injectable ivermectin have any effect on those maggots as they bore into the animal?
I said it would. It's not ever been studied and cleared for that, but you're talking about an anti-parasitic agent that goes systemic. You're getting that, especially with the injectable, and you know that those fly larvae or maggots are consuming that tissue as they go. The biggest question related to how well it will control is what's the level of circulation in the tissue that they're starting to digest and consume. The regular fly maggots that are consuming dead tissue, you probably don't have much circulation there to do it. But from a New World screwworm aspect that's going after fresh tissue, I think it has a higher likelihood of having some benefit there. But hopefully we'll never get to that point. But that's a good question.
If we can back up for a minute to the tick-borne disease, I had a question or two for you there. You talked briefly towards the end about making sure that we don't become the one that's spreading the disease. What in particular are you talking about there?
We contribute to some of those things by the instruments that we use in processing cattle, the overextended use of one particular needle. Because each time you inject in an animal, there potentially of having some blood transfer or fluid transfer on the outside of that needle that could then go into the next animal that you vaccinate. Some diseases, especially viral, I think about bovine leukosis virus. A lot of dairies are very particular with that one, and they will change needles on every animal. I know very few producers who are vaccinating their own animals that change needles that often, but we do encourage proper needle management because that can do it. Any other instrument that can draw blood, whether it be a castrating knife or a dehorning tool or an ear tagger, if it's not clean between animals, can potentially transfer disease organisms that were present in the fluids of the previous animal it was used on. So we just need to be aware of those things that we use as tools from the normal processing that we put our livestock through and the handling processes that we aren't a source of that contamination basically by the mechanisms that we use to go about our daily practices.
All righty, thank you. And one more question. I've heard it said that a lot of the symptoms of this new tick-borne disease are similar to anaplasma. How can we tell the difference and know whether we need to give antibiotics or not?
From a simply clinical view of it, you can't tell the difference. The signs are very similar: weight loss, being lethargic, not having energy. You can lose pregnancies, the death loss, all of that comes into play. I will say that in the later stages, I don't think the tularemia will cause the typical pumpkin colored, so to speak, when you get that kind of liver damage. But the clinical signs that you're going to see, you can't tell them apart. It takes diagnostic efforts, which would mean a blood sample. And the blood sample to take would be one of your purple top tubes, because the best diagnosis for tularemia is currently a PCR, which requires whole blood, not clotted blood. So you can also send in fresh tissue if you're doing a postmortem, but it takes a diagnostic lab to you have tularemia or anaplasma. So currently, if you see an animal that exhibits signs that are associated with anaplasmosis previously, until you get a firm diagnosis, it does no harm to use an antibiotic like you would for anaplasmosis in case anaplasma is what you're looking at. But I tell you, if it's tularemia, the antibiotics doesn't do any good at all. There is no current treatment available for tularemia. The biggest part and difference between tularemia and anaplasmosis is because tularemia has the capability as a parasite. Part of its life when it gets in the animal is to attack white blood cells, not just red blood cells. And when you have an organism that's attacking both those cellular mechanisms, you're hit the immune system even harder, and that's why tularemia can cause some death loss even in young cattle, whereas anaplasma you typically only see it clinically in older ones. I hope that helps a little bit, David.
Sure. Thank you very much.
You bet. Appreciate having the opportunity to share that information, and I'll stick on here and field questions, or maybe throw a few out on my own as we go.
Yeah. No, perfect. Thanks, Doc. I appreciate you being here and your knowledge and expertise. Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and shift gears here a little bit. Kind of move over to maybe more livestock / forage management. As you know, we're kind of rounding the corner here from summer. It's not too far away. We've been pretty fortunate here in most of our trade territory in Missouri and the Midwest to have some very good timely rains this spring. Temperatures were probably down lower than normal. Last couple of weeks we've been a little above normal and a little drier, but we are in August now. heck, I know this last weekend we had lows in the 60s and even saw some 50s last night. So been very fortunate weather-wise to be where we're at in most of our trade territory. But just kind of wanted to get talking about a few things that producers maybe need to be aware of, things to consider as we move forward here in the growing season, and from just an animal management standpoint. So, Lane, I've got you on here. You're our resident cow man. You cover a lot of territory in Missouri. Very knowledgeable with cattle management, cattle production. One thing that I kind of, like I mentioned, we've had a lot of rain this year, right? There's a lot of fescue that is still being rolled up right now. I mean, we're August 1, and it's not uncommon for fescue to be getting rolled up later in the spring and early summer, just because the way our typical springs go. But gosh, I don't know if I ever remember a first cutting of fescue being, still being rolled up in early August. And so I guess from a management standpoint, kind of talk to us, what kind of things do we need to be considering if we're harvesting some late, particularly cool season forages? What does that look like from management going forward this winter? Just kind of walk us through what that looks like, especially on your end, owning cattle yourself, and talking with some folks out in the countryside.
Yeah, sure. So, with all the rain, it was wonderful, but this hay season was terrible to try to get anything done. Very, very short windows, coupled with some very terrible rain percentage chances put out by our friends in the weather sector. But I mean, several things is, historical hay tonnage. We've had a ton of hay out there, and the thing you always hear is, oh, that's good hay. Oh, I got good hay. But without testing it, you don't know that. And something else, especially in Missouri, a lot of older producers, they saw the high cattle prices either the end of last year, this year, and have either completely sold out or um, have trimmed down on cow numbers overall, and have decided to pay every single acre that they can get equipment over. That coupled with still leftover inventory of last year, we have gobs of hay everywhere. A lot of it is very low quality hay. So a couple of things that, like Landry wanted me to touch on, is determining what group of cows you have, what their needs are. If you've got a cow, a spring herd that's gonna calve in 1st of March, we need to be feeding her a lower quality starting off. Our fall lactating cow that's got that 400 500 pound calf on it going into winter, yeah, she needs to be getting our best hay that we have. Because you're wasting it on the spring cow that doesn't need it, if she's already in good body condition score. The other thing is too is I've gotten a call a lot here lately is, what's a bred cow bringing, which that's all over the board, but it's high is the answer, short answer. But I've just got so much hay and I've just got so much grass. I don't want it to go to waste. Hear that a lot. I don't want it to go to waste. Instead of finding more cattle to graze that excess forage, step that aside and let that and stockpile that. Maybe go in there and clip it, but just let it sit. And come regrowth time, come deer season, come November, you've got that on the stump fescue. It's better than the bale you rolled up here last week in August. That's a little bit of a cultural shift for some guys. Once they start feeding, they want to start feeding. They're gonna graze it all out. But right now is the time to start making plans for how you're going to feed cattle this winter. A lot of guys, there's a lot of baleage that was put up, just because of the moisture and the rain not being able to get out there. But we had great wheat crop this year. Guys that baled wheat, just hearing crazy numbers. Of course, sorghum, Sudan, everybody's just got a ton of stuff. So, just test what you got, see what you got, because I'm going to wager a lot of this stuff is pretty tough. Everything that I've seen is pretty tough. It's not what you think it is. The other thing is too, not to steal any of David's thunder but the later stuff we're baling, we're seeing a lot more weed pressure in it, whether it be Strelitzia lespedeza, all that late stuff. Well, I know David has preached this in the past, and I've tried to do it myself. It's hard to do it, but we're going to be spreading a lot of that stuff in our feeding grounds this year on rolling hay. So if we can really pick a spot that, hey, I know next year I'm going to have to spray this spot because I've got a heavily weed infected hay that I'm feeding. That's what I've got. But just make the plans on that. David, is there anything else along those lines of just taking forage samples, knowing what you need, knowing what, different classes of cows need before I switch to something else? But that's kind of the notes I had there. Is the two things is testing what you need to see what you have, and then also trying to set aside some of that grass that you have right now, clipping it and getting it ready to go for early fall grazing. Are kind of the two things that I would see some success in.
Yeah, no, and I think David, you're muted there, but yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and it seems like cattle producers, we've joked about this, but seems like they're always complaining about something, and record high prices, more grass than we know what to do with, more hay that'll fit in the barn. I mean, those are, let's be realistic, those are good problems to have, right? Now the quality may be a little bit lower, but feed commodity prices are very, are low. So offsetting, that lower hay quality with a little bit of feedstuffs makes sense, especially when cattle are, prices are where they're at. So I think you're right on track there. Just knowing what you have. A lot of people don't do that, but man, when we get, I was talking with a guy the other day and he's like, well, we're getting ready to bale this field for the first time. It's got a lot of green underneath it, so it ought to be pretty good. I'm like, yeah, but you also, about 50% of that you're going to cut is a stem and a seed head and, foliage that's mature. And it's just not, for instance, I had some tested and it was pretty low quality. I will say it was a little higher than I was expecting for late July, but it was in the 7s to 8s, protein wise, and you're talking probably upper 40s, low 50s TDNs, which is not great by any means. Now I did have some crabgrass that I put up, or had put up that was right where I wanted to be. We were talking 12% protein, low 60s, upper 50s TDN. We'll get into that a little bit later on having, the value of having a warm season forage of some sort. But anyways, there's gonna need to be some supplementation on that fescue hay that's still being cut or was cut here in the last month or so. So,
something else that you made me think of is, obviously comparative to an average year, that fescue has still been good up until maybe 2 weeks ago. We got this heat shock come in and everything. Kind of what we've got. That's what we're gonna have for a while. So cattle I've been doing great on it, all classes of cattle. Let's not let that slip. Let's keep on rolling with, like you said, that cheap supplementation to keep them going, because that fescue now is losing a lot. Usually we're already in that window, but it's been pretty nice to go out there and see, fresh, good green, lush grass. Kind of almost feels like we're in the Flint Hills or something in southern Missouri, but it's fescue. It's kind of crazy what it can do with mild temperatures and all the moisture we've had. So I think Landry wanted me to talk a little bit about the cattle market overall. I'm no genius or anything, but I've been fortunate enough to talk to a lot of top end people in the industry and in all walks of life, and everyone gets worried of comparative to 14 and what happened there, and got to understand the 10-year cow cycle, and we are in that, and something that a lot of people don't think about is this fall and 26, both dairy and beef herds will be retaining heifers. We're never going to get back to the numbers of our all-time high in the early 90s due to cattle being we're doing more with less. Cattle are more productive now. But that's only going to contribute to that retention of heifers, going to contribute to the tightening of feeder and fed cattle supplies in 26. So, some of the stuff we got written down here, we were basically 1 million head short in 25, expected with heifer retention, another 800,000 head down in 26. Coupled with some of the stuff Dr. Martin was talking about, the lockdown on the southern border. A lot of the southern plains relies on those Mexican cattle, southern cattle. Coupled with new import and export partners. What Australia historically, they've always been an exporter of their beef into the U.S. The thing that blows my mind is the continued support at the meat case by the U.S. consumer. That just blows my mind. We're seeing record prices, and some of that, is contributed to, lower unemployment rates and record high disposable incomes. And then something that is we've seen in the past, but it's really a lot of people on social media are pushing it. But these carnivore diets, the growing popularity of protein in the American diet has really pushed overall support. So all those things together are keeping it very, very strong. Something else that is exciting is, a lot of people are taking money and putting improvement in their pastures. It's not a whole, everybody, but a lot of people are, times are good. We're seeing new pickup trucks, new trailers, new infrastructure, new fence. And, my job is to, try to hone some of that in and let's put it on our pasture grounds that, yeah, they're really good this year, but how many years of neglect have they had?
Mm.
So just some of those things. But cattle markets are very good, looking to be very good. It just, my dad says this quite often, but supply and demand creates, all markets, solves all markets. So,
Yeah. No, and I think, you kind of look long term or try to predict what the next few years are going to be, and everybody seems like it's, the market's going to stay, where it should be, where it needs to be, where it currently is, just due to our numbers and when that herd rebuilding is going to take place. I think, like you said, there's probably some heifer retention that's going on. I know on the flip side of that, there's guys, when you can get $2,400 for a heifer, it makes it doesn't a lot very where to try to keep her for another year and a half before she has a calf. Coupled with, there's a lot of folks, and you mentioned it, Lane, there's a lot of guys retiring. This is the best it's ever been. Man, if you're close to thinking about wanting to get out of this game and spend some time with the family and enjoy a retired life, this is the time to do it. And I think that's going to only, to some degree, is going to hurt some of those numbers as well. But that being said, yeah, it's tough to see, where this market's going to go. Again, I listened to some podcasts and having Dr. Mark, if you heard about the Asian longhorn tick and the screwworm from the media, it was death, doom, and gloom. And then you talk with a professional like Doc, and he's like, yeah, just kind of keep doing what you're doing and it won't be a big deal. I wonder if some of that's kind of propped up by some of the larger corporations that would probably like to see a downturn in this market to gain a little more market share. And unfortunately, that may be what it takes to really change the cycle of this, is some sort of, man-made natural disaster event to kind of kickstart things back to where they were, 5-6 years ago. But
something else that came up yesterday, and I don't know if it goes into effect this week or next week, but with the current administration, tariff and there's a tariff on Argentina beef coming in that's like a 7+%. That's where a lot of our lean and trim comes from. So that that's going to be prop up ground beef even higher. So I mean when you can talking about keeping the heifers, when you're selling a 5-year-old bull and making, $1,500 on, and you used it for 4 years, it's pretty crazy times. I mean, just as of today, it's 9:45. I got August feeders at $3.38 and fats or live cattle at $2.34. So,
Yeah.
one other caveat I'll throw in there is, something could happen also with the current administration and just how much of a global market we're in. It's not unreasonable to think that we have a lot we have a lot higher chance of it falling than going much higher. Talk to somebody that knows about LRP. You don't have to take a full 100% coverage. Just take something that makes sense for you. It is a very a lot of people take offense to it. I don't need the insurance, whatever. My cattle are good. Talk to someone. There's several people within MFA or just out there now that are selling, that are more knowledgeable on the subject, but it is a very, very nice tool to have in the box.
Yeah. Well, and I think you start, like you mentioned, the supply and demand thing, we look out, we look a year, 2, 3 years out, and it looks like everything should kind of be status quo, right? Prices should stay pretty solid where they're at till we start to rebuild that herd. It's the unknowns. It's the things that we can't control. It's the things that affect the market that are not supply and demand driven, because we are at the top of that market, right? We're to where we pretty much think it's going to be. I mean, we're getting some, maybe a little pushback from some consumer demand and things of that nature. So, we feel like it's going to stay like that. It's going to stay high for a while, but that's not to say that there won't be another fire somewhere, or some sort of a natural disaster, or an outbreak of some sort that would just put this market on its heels. And that's where that LRP comes into play, right? It's protecting those. That's why we have insurance, health insurance for ourselves. That's why we have car insurance. I'm a good driver, but it's the outside influences that I can't affect that may have, that may cause me to get into a wreck and have to face some out-of-pocket expenses. So, anyways, yeah, I appreciate it. Anything else you got there, Lane?
No, not necessarily that I can think of off the bat, but
okay. Well, I appreciate it, and yeah, feel free to chime in here. We'll kind of wrap this thing up. We've got some forage and forage pasture management that I'd like to talk with you all about, and that's why Mr. David Moore is here, our range and pasture specialist, the expert in this field. And so, David, when we're talking with producers, like we mentioned before, we beat a dead horse. We've had good springs, we've had good forage production. What are some things that you're seeing across the countryside? What are some things that you're talking with producers now? We're the 5th of August. What are you kind of talking with folks to get them set up for this fall, or even this winter, or even next spring for that matter?
Well, that's a pretty loaded broad spectrum question, but I'll try to pick it apart and go from there. One of the things I'm seeing as I go out across Guy's farm and look at fields and grass is, yes, we have a ton of grass. We've got waist deep, chest deep grass in places. But part that grass with your hands a little bit and look down in, and you start finding the plethora of weeds that we've got coming in there. Lane touched on that we didn't get any spraying done in April or May to speak of, and pretty much didn't get any done in June till the last half of June. So I've got a number of guys that are feeling the need to clip those pastures, having them clip them pretty tall, knee high if you can get your cutter that high. Now you might be able to catch those weeds if they need to be sprayed. You might be able to catch them as they emerge through the top of that grass canopy, because fescue is really not going to grow from that point, but you might be able to get some spraying done yet this year. Probably one of the biggest things I do want to touch on is fertility. Guys, we have made a ton of grass this year. We've really hammered on that. We have made a ton of grass, far exceeding the amount of fertilizer that we've put on to generate it. which means we've mined phosphorus and potash out of the soil to make the grass that we've made. We really, really need to think about taking some of the dollars that our cattle have generated at the sale barn this year and putting it back into phosphorus and potash for this fall. We can start now, basically, anytime in mid-August, putting that P&K on. And every once in a while, I hear somebody say, yeah, we need to put that phosphorus and potash on so it can break down and be ready to go to work by spring. I'm going to tell you, once it gets dissolved in water, it's basically available for the plant at that point. It really doesn't take a lot of time. But what we do see happen is if phosphorus and potash are there in ample supplies, the root system of the grass has an opportunity to repair itself from the abuse of summer. Typically, in the summertime, we just graze it right into the ground and we really work it over hard. But it gives that root system plenty of time to repair itself. It wakes up in the spring, happy, healthy, and ready to go to work for you. So I can't overemphasize that we need to make up. If you're used to putting on a couple 100 pounds of fertilizer in the spring and feeling like that's going to be adequate, I'm going to tell you, put on at least 200 pounds, maybe 300 pounds, just divided between phosphorus and potash this fall, to try to make up for what we have produced this year. I'm going to compare the phosphorus and potash that you have in the soil. If we pull a soil test, it's like having a bank account. Every bale of hay you make is a swipe of the debit card. You just pulled a pile of phosphorus and potash out. Every time you turn cows in to graze for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it's another swipe of the debit card. You keep swiping without making deposits, and eventually we run empty. So we got to make some deposits. We got to put some P&K on the ground. I cannot overemphasize that. Not to beat a dead horse, but let me switch gears just a little bit to dry fertilizer impregnation, Ultigraze. We can put Duracor on the fertilizer and help to control some of the weeds, more future weeds than present weeds. But so the question becomes, well, if I start putting P&K on now, do I want to incorporate some Duracor into that? And you certainly can. We got to remember that when we put Duracor on fertilizer, we're not quite as good at controlling weeds that are emerged as we are controlling weeds that haven't happened yet. So I would say, I think you'll get more bang for your buck with impregnated fertilizer either late fall or springtime than you will right now, because most of the weeds that we're going to deal with in the next 3 months are out there already. They're emerged, they're big. We're probably not going to control them with dry fertilizer impregnation. Now, if you wait till Halloween, deer season, on up to Christmas, I think you're going to hit a home run, especially on hay ground. This year we really saw guys trying to get across hay ground with spray, trying to control the thistles, the teasel, the mare's tail, the henbit, the chickweed, so that their hay is clean. They couldn't get on that ground because we rained every other minute this spring, and the mud just kept you off the ground. So dry fertilizer impregnation is a way to control those and start with a clean field. So if I put fertilizer on in that November timeframe with Duracor on it, we really will have pretty clean fields. That residual lasts well through the winter time. So I'm going to talk about residual for just a minute. How does residual go away? It goes away 2 ways. Number one is with water. That's the biggest one. Water will either dilute the effects of the Duracor or it pushes it down through the soil profile and it goes away. Number 2 is bacteria. When the soil is warm, we have bacteria that kind of take apart that Duracor molecule and gobble it up. So warm soils, we have bacteria to deal with. Warm or cool soils, we have water to deal with. Most of the time in the winter, even if we get ice and we get snow, we don't have that doesn't translate to inches and inches and inches of water. So that residual lasts a long time. Now contrast that to the summertime. This springtime, late spring, early summer, when you're getting 20 inches of rain a month, that residual doesn't last very long. But in the wintertime, it lasts really well. One of the most underutilized tools that we have in the weed control market is dry fertilizer impregnation in the late fall. It's a home run. It is absolutely a home run. I would almost say that it's a grand slam for you. It's a big deal, and we don't do enough of it. So if you have questions on that, don't hesitate to reach out to your local store and ask them about doing some dry fertilizer impregnation later on this fall. I want to be clear on something though. I'm not telling you to hold off on putting P and K on. I'm just saying, if you sell calves this fall, you've got money, put some P and K on, put some Duracor with it. You're going to be pleased with yourself and with the job that you've done. If you've never done it before, you're just going to be amazed at what it can do for you.
Yeah. And that's, David, that's a good point, because, and Lane mentioned it, when we're bringing home, when producers are making some profit, and got some money to spend, it usually goes to that, either that tractor or that truck, or it goes to, some sort of a maybe facility upgrade. But sometimes we forget about, investing in our pastures, investing in the grass that brought us to the dance, so to speak. And so, I think you're exactly right. I think taking some of that money and putting it back into that land, especially, we've been pretty hard on it, the last few years in the drought that we've been in. We beat it up. It needs some time to recuperate, and it probably needs some nutrients to help it do that. So, yeah, very good point there. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's something I think that felt like need to be hit on, because it's something that gets overlooked, unfortunately, a little bit too much.
No, I agree with you. We talk about infrastructure upgrades and we start thinking about steel. But one of the biggest infrastructure assets that we have is the grass that's growing on our pastures and in our hayfields. So we're improving genetics all the time. Work on improving that grass. Maybe we take $100 or $200 per calf that we sell and say, that's going to go back into the ground. Let's make that ground better. Just, take 5 or 10% of what you pull off that calf and put it back into producing future calves. We've got a new product that we've rolled out this year. Many of you heard for a long time about Proclova. We talked about Proclova, I think, for 10 years before it got rolled out, but it didn't get rolled out as Proclova. It got rolled out as NovaGraze. So NovaGraze is a herbicide that allows white clover and annual Lespedeza to survive a herbicide application. It's also a herbicide that gives you far greater weed control than we've ever been able to get, utilizing Butirac, 2,4-DB, 2,4-D-amine, about anything you want to put out there that spares clover. When we think about sparing the clover, if I'm thinking about 2,4-D-amine or 2,4-DB, if my dose is light enough that the clover survives, chances are the weeds are going to survive. It is not the case with NovaGraze. NovaGraze will knock your clover to the ground. There is no doubt you're going to think it's going to die, but the white clover will stand back up. The annual Lespedeza is going to stand back up, and the weeds are not. It does a good job of weed control. You're going to be pleased with it. So one of the things I wanted to touch on is that NovaGraze has more applications than just applying it to white clover or annual Lespedeza applications. If you're looking for a product that has really good weed control, but not very much in the way of residual activity, NovaGraze is your option. Yes, it's going to kill red clover, but 30 days later, I can plant red clover back. That's pretty interesting. I can go out there and get really good weed control on my field that has clovers in it. 30 days later, I can plant clover back. I can't do that with Duracor. I can't do that with Grazon. So that's something that's kind of new to think about. I can use it. Let's say this fall, I want to be able to spray something to kill the weeds, and a couple weeks later be able to plant grass. I can do two things. I can use NovaGraze and come back in with grass 2 weeks later. I can use Duracore at a rate of 12 ounces per acre and come back in with plant grass in September. So um, I want to say that one of our underutilized tools, this is another underutilized tool, is using a product that has residual to keep weeds out while we're allowing our new grass to come. We just don't do enough of that. We don't think about it. Our row crop guys use pre-emerge herbicides all the time. Pre-emerge is residual activity. It means the herbicide's working in the soil. Duracore will do that for you. 12 ounces of Duracore will kill a lot of the weeds that are out there and control a lot of weeds as they try to emerge. I can't tell you how many hundreds, if not thousands of calls I get every year. I planted grass last fall and man, the weeds are they're about to take it. What can I spray? Well, you really can't spray anything until that grass gets a little bit bigger. So the question becomes then, why can't I spray anything? That spray just controls broadleaf herbicides. Well, it controls broadleaf herbicides, but it also has activity that those grass products have to metabolize. It metabolizes it via the roots. So I need roots that are big enough root mass to metabolize it a herbicide. Otherwise, it hurts it and potentially kills it. That's really important. And I'll kind of close with that. To summarize, NovaGraze is good. Think about it in other times other than just clover applications. Get P&K on the soil. That's really, really important. Try to use some dry fertilizer impregnation if you're fertilizing late this fall. That's kind of where I would end things. Try not to let weeds go to seed because there's going to be a million of them out there this fall.
Yep. That's a good point. And I like that point that Lane and David kind of both tag team on there, is that as much late hay is getting put up right now, this hay is going to have a lot of weeds and weed seed in it. It's just the way it is. And so, being cognizant of that, whether that's where those plants were at this year, that might be perennial weeds, or where you're going to unroll that hay at next year, might be looking at some issues there. The last thing that I would hit on, and you guys kind of touched on it, would be stockpiling fescue as we're moving into August now. In the next 30 days, think about adding a little fertility, adding some, 50 pounds of nitrogen, some P&K, like David mentioned. Would be a great time to just kind of put it all on at once on those fields that you're planning on stockpiling. Stockpiling means maybe you've taken you're taking a hay field that you've got cut late, and you're going to set that aside. You're going to put some fertility, some nitrogen back on it here this fall, this summer, and just leave it alone for the rest of the fall and early winter, and utilize that fescue, maybe in December, January, February, March. That fescue has the ability to really preserve its quality, its integrity as we go into winter, as long as we don't have any, multiple ice storms. The snows don't really bother it. I tested some last year that we got a decent little ice storm there in Southwest Missouri last year. Tested it after we had that ice storm. It wasn't a long lasting ice storm. I think that was probably part of it, but didn't really see a whole lot of quality degradation in it. So it just kind of depends. But, in my opinion, one of the best attributes of fescue is the ability to stockpile it, feeding hay, putting up hay, buying hay, however you're getting that winter feed is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, expense to a cattle producer. And so if we can kind of reduce that hay feeding and increase the amount of time that those cattle are on pasture, that's usually even more profit in our pocketbook. So think about doing that this year, moving forward. We've been a little dry here the last couple weeks, but I know some parts of our territory have been getting consistent rains, and if we're getting consistent rains, or it looks like we've got some rain in the forecast, be a good time to throw on a little nitrogen and the P&K like David mentioned earlier. But that's really all I've got. Does anybody else have anything to add?
Well, if you don't mind me chiming in again,
Not at all.
well, I would just add and support what David has said. And from my perspective, I'd tell you that I don't have row crop ground, but I have hay crop ground on my own too. And I have made use of NutriTrack. I've done some diagnostic on the soil. What made it come to mind was my local agronomy specialist notified me this is the year that we're going to come back and sample again. And I think as we encourage producers to think about putting that on your forage ground, why not do a little diagnostics too to know what to put where and use your money even more wisely in terms of putting the right stuff in the right spot. And it has made a difference on my hay ground. So I'd voice some support to that. But it's good discussions. Thanks for letting me be a part of it today. I appreciate it.
That's a great point, Doc. That is a great point. I didn't bring that up, and I should have. The one last thing, we kind of talked about, Lane touched on it, Landry's touched on it. Where we feed hay, we typically have weeds there that don't grow anyplace else. We typically have more weeds in those areas, but due to the amount of nutrients that get stockpiled in those spots. One thing to consider come springtime, if you're going to pull cattle off of your winter feeding area on April 15th or thereabouts, go in right then and apply Duracor. Put a pint of Duracor down on the ground as a pre-emerge to try to stop those weeds from coming. The Jimson weed and the spiny amaranth, and then the plethora of other things that come on feeding ground. Next, May 15th, so wait 30 days, May 15th, come back in and let's drill some millet, some crabgrass, some sorghum sudan. Let's drill something into that field to take advantage of all the nutrients that are there. I know that this is pasture ground that typically may not get hit again for quite a while because you abused it through the wintertime, but you drill some summer annual into it, you're going to be amazed at how much grass you have there that you can take advantage of, by the middle part of June. Put a warm season annual in there. I think you'll like it. Landry, thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I really appreciate it. It's been good.
Yeah. No, listen, I appreciate you all taking time out of your busy schedules to join me today. I appreciate everyone that's listening. And if we can be of service to you or help to you, please reach out to your local MFA. And with that, we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Made for Agriculture, brought to you by MFA, your whole farm solution.